Hello everyone, welcome to the Recruiters Hangout. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm not on the roof today, unfortunately. I'm in the office, so you've got a messy office and people walking around behind me. The Rec Hangout show today, we'll be talking about can technology do a better job? Presumably a better job than a human being we're talking about, of matching the right candidates with the right jobs, or the quality candidates with the right jobs indeed. We've got some fantastic guests joining us, which will ask to introduce themselves in a minute. As always, the show is hosted by Alan Whitford, strategist from Abtech Partnership and founder of RC Euro Community. Louise Triance is keeping an eye on the Rec Hangout hashtag, REC Hangout hashtag on Twitter. Feel free to comment and ask questions and join in and comment on there. And Louise will pass anything you have to say on to Alan. And also Mark Stevens from Smart Recruit Online is here to join in and ask questions as well. If you do want to comment on the Webinar Jam chat stream, you've got that in front of you if you are live in the show as well. Hello everyone, I shall type in. You can see it there. Feel free to ask questions, comment, put your opinions across. They're very, very welcome. My name's Louis Welcomme from Colleague Software as well. Alan, I shall pass over to yourself.
Thank you, Louis, and Mark, Louise. This should be an exciting show for us on this bright summery day. Three great guests, and we're going to be talking about things like algorithms, psychology, science. And the topic we put out there is, can technology do a better job than the recruiter for actually matching people? So we already thought we'd start on the controversial side. I'm going to just ask the guests to introduce themselves. As Louis said, we're having a chat among each other. Ping us in your notes on Twitter on hashtag Rec Hangout, and we'll try and get you into the conversation as well. Jakub, I'd like to start with you. CV parsing, data extraction, all about matching, and this is a technology that's been around for 15 or so years. Why is it taking this long for us to just go for it? But introduce yourself and Textkernel first. Jakub.
Hi, Alan. Hi, Louis. Thanks for having me on this chat. My name is Jakub Zavrel. I'm the founder and CEO of Textkernel, and we are one of the global players in semantic extraction, semantic matching, and this is really an AI and natural language processing technology. So my own background is in the research in AI and machine learning, and this has really been building up steam since like the late 1990s. And back then it was in the laboratories, and I think what we're seeing right now is that these technologies are maturing very fast. They're seeing kind of exponential growth in their capabilities. Every year we're seeing progress, mainly through the use of machine learning and huge computational resources and a lot of data. We're seeing kind of reduction of the error rate. So these technologies have existed for a long time, but right now they are becoming so reliable, not only in HR for matching people and jobs, but also in many other fields like computer vision, machine translation, robotics. All of this is, as I'm sure everybody has noticed, coming into our daily lives very quickly.
All right, thank you, Jakub. And you mentioned that word research, so I'm going to go over to Darshana first. Darshana, you're a head of research at one of the newer players in the marketplace of looking at bringing together psychology, science for matching candidates. Tell us a bit about yourself and Pymetrics.
Absolutely. I'll start with Pymetrics. So Pymetrics is a career matching platform. What we're trying to do is both help job seekers find jobs they like and can excel at based on their strengths, and recruiters and companies find people who are suited for the jobs they're trying to hire for. And we do this using a combination of behavioral science, so things that come from the field of neuroscience, psychology, behavioral economics, cognitive sciences, social psychology, that kind of stuff. And then we use data science and machine learning algorithms that we tailor make for companies and use these algorithms to help them pick the right candidates. I, as you mentioned, am the head of research at Pymetrics, and my background is in neuroscience and psychology. So I have a PhD in neuroscience and psychology from Princeton, And human behavior has been, behavior in all aspects, individual, group, development, evolution, has been my big love so far.
Thank you, Darshana, and welcome to your first show. I'm glad to have you and Pymetrics here. And Gorkan, thank you. I should be calling all of you doctor here at this point, shouldn't I? Actually, but Gorkan, I'm gonna dispense with the formality if you don't mind. But we've had a nice lead-in of data science, psychology science, neuroscience, and you're there doing it in the university. So you seem to be the glue to bring these two together.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, so my name is Gorkan Ahmetoglu. I'm based at University College London, and my background is in psychology, business psychology, and specifically looking at the psychology of people. So trying to understand what makes people more talented than others. So what is it that people need to have in order to succeed? But also, how do we measure that thing? And I've done research on this for about 10 years now, and I've also co-founded a company which deals with psychometric testing. It's called meta profiling, and this is sort of a step into that direction. I think the first step, which is basically using either self-reports or situational judgments or gamified versions of particular tests that try to assess these unobservable psychological variables. More and more what we are trying to do is basically to understand how we can use any data that we have, that data, but also including social media data, and actually get the valuable information from that data. And I think the way to do that is to link that algorithm to a particular outcome at work that a recruiter would be interested in. And this is where kind of more recent machine learning and other types of technologies come in.
Okay, so it feels to me like someone outside who isn't really totally into this stuff like all of us are and is just a recruiter might be thinking, man, these folks are telling me that I'm out of a job because the machine is going to do it all. Is that what you're saying? Can the machine just do it all?
Was that for me or was that?
Yeah, go ahead, Gorkan, while you're there, and then we'll. Yeah.
My personal opinion is that a machine could do it all eventually. I think we're not quite there yet, and from kind of the experience that I have with HR and recruiters, I think the progress is slower than it should be in my view. I don't want to be kind of too negative about the future, but I do think that computers should be able to do most of the things that a human being can do in recruitment, and probably also better. And the reason for that is that what someone who is in the business of selecting people into organizations need to do primarily is to be accurate in terms of their judgment of how good a person is or how much potential a person has to be successful in a particular job. But given that human beings are limited both in terms of the information that they can process, in terms of the information that they can have about a particular individual, those limitations, I think, is where a computer, can have so much more resources, and these are limitations that the computer isn't limited by, basically. So eventually that could happen, and I'm gonna sort of keep it short, but my view is that it could be done, but we're far from that. Just yet, so you will have your job for the next 10 years at least.
All right.
I would actually agree with that, and one of the main reasons for that is because there's so much more to the recruiter job than just matching people with jobs, right? I mean, there's all the social interaction, there's the persuasion part of selling the job to the candidate or selling the candidate to the hiring manager. I think there's not even been a good start of automating that, but it could very well come. It's not impossible in the future. I think when we're talking today, we're mainly talking about the kind of quality of matching that's currently the state of the art. And if you ask the question, can an algorithm do that better than a recruiter, I would ask two counter questions. And one is better than which recruiter, because I think there's a lot of quality difference between different recruiters. And what does it actually mean to say better? I mean, if you're saying better is faster, or with less work for people, or lower cost, more consistent, I would say, yeah, today's technology for sure, faster, higher volumes, less drudgery, less routine stuff, more consistent. If you're talking about the kind of the key area I think we should focus our discussion on is candidate quality. Will an algorithm today select the right people? I think we're sort of advancing pretty quickly at the moment, but the consensus is that it's not ready to completely replace the human judgment. So it's kind of situation where you will have, for next few years, man and machine working together, machine doing the drudgery of selecting, let's say, top 10 recommendation shortlist out of 1 million candidates, but then human making the final judgment to make sure that the 6, 7 relevant ones which are in there are actually the ones that are contacted.
Okay,
I'm gonna jump in here for a second. Sorry, I think there's also the kind of jobs, whether it's an entry-level job or whether you've moved up the ladder and now they're looking to recruit for a higher-level job. I think that makes a difference too, because once you get you move up in a field, I think there are a lot of soft skills that come into play that are harder to quantify. People skills, management skills, things like that. And so I think it gets a little bit more layered and trickier for the algorithm to take over. And I'm in complete agreement in that we're pretty far away from there now, and right now it's definitely a collaborative effort between an algorithm and the human that both builds it but also like enhances, decision making, reduces bias, all of that using the algorithm.
Okay, Mark's got a question he wants to jump in with.
Early doors, sorry. Darshana, I'd like to respond to that in regards to, we're talking about candidate matching. So how do the algorithms deal with operational type roles, where they're more task orientated? How does the technology adapt to that? And perhaps one of you explain how that works?
But when you say task oriented, are you talking about more mechanical jobs, or can it be task oriented and still, computer programming or any of those kinds of things? I
think when most of us think of sort of candidate matching and the parsing technology, we think about keywords, and obviously where we have a lack of keywords, enough sort of content to latch onto to create the complexity of the algorithm, and I typically associate that with a more of an operational type role. How does the technology adapt to that? To create the accuracy in terms of things like putting candidates into order of suitability in the dashboard.
Right. And so all of this, the algorithm itself is very dependent on how good the data is, right? That you build this algorithm on, how you collect this data, what data you're basing it on. So one of the things that is increasingly, definitely in the academic world, but more so now outside as well, is being used is observations of behavior. So direct behavioral reads. Not only relying on self-reports or doing a mixture of getting cognitive reads, emotional reads, things like that. And so once the data is stronger, then you can build stronger algorithms, because you do have the technology now to deal with more complex data sets, derive nonlinear relationships, pick up relationships that the human being may have a little bit more difficulty doing. And so if you combine the two, in that if you depend on good quality data and build the algorithms off of this, I think the combination gives you a lot of power, and that's important.
Is this where semantics comes into play?
Yeah, I think there's two important things to maybe clarify a misunderstanding about what algorithmic matching involves. For one, it's not purely restricted to the stuff that's explicitly written in the let's say in CVs or job descriptions, right? There's a lot of knowledge about the labor market. There are knowledge structures defined for the competences that, let's say, a particular type of profession like a carpenter or a project manager or a programmer actually needs to have, even if they don't write it in the actual text. So good semantic matching algorithms will take that kind of world knowledge or domain knowledge into account. So that's really important, that it goes way beyond keywords. The other thing that's important, I think, to clarify is that there's a lot of data, as Darshana mentioned, that come from completely different sources, like assessments, psychological profiling, previous work tasks completed, test scores, and everything that comes from interview. Even there are things like attempts to look at video interviews and actually classify them based on certain personality traits and behavioral characteristics, and all of this data can be fed into the matching algorithms side by side with the textual data from CVs and jobs.
Right. I'm just going to jump back in here, and like the more of these different kinds of information you have, the more powerful the algorithm becomes, right? So as opposed to just going with a single measure, now you have different combinations of measures coming in from different angles, and that makes your algorithm incredibly powerful. And so in many cases, the more the richer your data set, the better you can build something off of it.
And there will always be a lot of candidates that you have no CV or no, let's say, written data about. Think about job seekers which anonymously visit a job board, for example, or a search engine. By analyzing what they're looking at and what they're clicking on and how they're navigating the site, you can actually get a pretty good skills and competences profile from them without a single written word.
Yeah, or the gamification solutions where you have people come in, you have them play games and extract traits from those behaviors, so those kinds of things as well, which is some of the directions that we're going in.
Yeah.
Should I just to add to those comments, I think what Darshana said earlier is probably the most important point, is basically combination of all of the information that we have about people. If we think about the amount of information we potentially could have about any given person who has access to online and has kind of navigated on the internet. So these can be things like assessments through either psychometric tests, psychological tests, interviews, or other types of assessment that they might have taken, scrolling on the internet, so any types of behaviors, searches, anything, imagine all the information that Google has about a particular person, social media, etc. So if we have all of that information, then what is the algorithm? I mean, I think the main thing to think about the algorithm is what are we trying to predict? I don't think it's necessarily about keywords that a company says about who they are, or even about what a particular company thinks is the culture of the company or the nature of the job. I think this is a sort of one step into the right direction, but the ultimate measure should clearly be things like, how does what does the profile of a high performer look in an organization? So if we take, for example, the social media account, the Google searches, and the assessments of the top 10% of people in terms of performance, and then build that profile for different organizations, which can be done through kind of machine learning, and then say these are the profiles that we're looking at for this particular organization because they are the same profiles as the top 10% in the organization. I think that would be the ultimate way of doing things. The thing is, we're still not there, but the technology, I think, is there to allow this to happen. But it's just a matter of time, I think, until we get there.
What I think is also interesting is to look at what recruiters actually do, right? So how does a human recruiter sort through a list of 250 applications and sort out the A, B, and C candidates? Or how does a recruiter actually search in a 100,000 or million CV database and get the right candidates out of there from a job rec? Well, I think if you're looking at what they're actually doing, a lot of them, most of them, actually are following some kind of algorithms, right? We all know the kind of stacks of paper with pluses and minuses that you circle around through the team, and then you put, you have the 10 really important criteria. You try to check them off and count how many each candidate has, and maybe one criterion is a little bit more important than the other one. I think this is what humans do, and actually machines are pretty good at this kind of counting and weighting.
The one problem with that is humans are riddled with conscious and unconscious biases, right? And so the weighting gets colored by many things: the gender of the person, what people are used to seeing a woman in a particular job or not seeing them in that job, the schools that people go to, and so you have all of these layers that are added by the human, which can be like particularly disadvantageous to certain groups, right? And that can be very tricky, which the machine in some ways, especially if you consciously try to move away from there, can help ameliorate. And I think that is one of the really nice things about introducing technology and algorithms into this business, is that you can actually try to have more equality now, like more job parity.
And I think that's a great theme, Darshana. I want to come back to that. I just want to do a bit of a reset for our audience. This is Rec Hangout. We're discussing the topics of machine learning, artificial intelligence, neuroscience, psychology, and the science of all of this, and how it can help actually make better matches, firing better quality candidates. And no, we're not taking your recruiter jobs away. So Jakub was very clear about that. You still have a job for a while. Three great guests, Darshana, Jakub, and Gorkan. And quite honestly, we're sitting here with probably the smartest show we've ever had on. So thank you guys for joining us for that. And Darshana, you brought to one thing about how this technology can help reduce bias. And Jakub, you've talked about what we need to do what the recruiters do. And I think there's a nice mix there. But also just going back to the tech platform for a moment, one of the challenges that we've seen with parsing, extraction, those sorts of tools, is that we're still working with two documents not necessarily suited for the job for which they've been prepared. A CV and a job spec, and we're trying to extract data from those documents, which may not be great data to begin with. Whereas what Darshana and Gorkan are talking about, which is a bit more, we're going to just assess the individual and their ability and their capabilities to map perhaps to a specific organization or type of a role, seems to be coming at it from the other side. How do we fix the bad data that we start with, Jakub, so that we can then have a much better utilization of what Darshana and Gorkan are talking about?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily such thing as bad or good data. There's simply less and more data. And I think these type of technologies and search itself and machine learning, basically the more signals you can add to the data, the more potential you have of doing the type of learning or the type of prediction that that's really possible. So I think traditionally we tend to see the document as just the only thing we have. I think we are moving now towards seeing it as one of the objects that represents this much more complex structure of the entire personal profile, some of which might be people's online social network profile, their behavioral profile, their assessments, their tests, their previous experiences, ratings. Just combine all of that, and the more data you have, the better data you will have for machine learning, even though a lot of the data is noisy. But that's the wonderful nature of machine learning. You can actually sort out signal from noise automatically without relying only on superficial stuff.
So I get that, and we'll come back to that, I think, with other two guests on the candidate side, and you're right, there's a lot that we can do. But what about on the job spec side? If we're starting with job specs and companies that want to do a job spec, we're kind of stuck with that. We'd love to get to the Lou Adler kind of approach, which is it's about the work. And I think what Darshana can talk about, some of the stuff Pymetrics is doing, is about going into a company and finding out how do people, and Gorkan also mentioned this, making sure what's right in the piece, what's good look like, what's great look like in the business. And do we just throw away job specs and only do that approach?
No, I still think we need a little bit of a combination of both. And it was mentioned earlier that the more information we have, the better, the richer our picture, right? The richer the picture of the individual, the richer the picture of the job itself. But yes, I think it's important to sort of distinguish between, what does it take to be a top performer at this job? What is it, in this particular organization, what is it that makes a person do well at their job? What does it take to be successful at completing those tasks? And I think that sort of information is very important. And so the combination of all of these things, I think, is what we should aim for. I know it's a hefty task. It's like, oh, let's do everything. But I think we can get there, and it's a good aim to have.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize the job spec is what we have, but the job spec is not a favorite of the hiring manager, right? The hiring manager goes to the recruiter and says, I need this and this type of person. Then, yeah, I'll work on that as soon as you give me the job spec. And then, I actually want somebody like Mary, who just left the team, or who was here last year. Can you find me a person like that? So this is the type, I think, the type of queries that semantic search should move towards realizing, rather than relying on long written documents, because they're what we have to work with today, but I don't think anybody's in love with them.
Isn't that a flaw anyway, in that job specifications don't motivate candidates to apply for jobs? I mean, some of the statistics that I've seen suggest that about 90% of all online searches by candidates are done by people who are in employment, which effectively means they're not committed to finding another job. And a specification list of what the client wants isn't going to influence a candidate to consider that job sounds better than something else. So if we transfer the specification into an advert for an opportunity, we're actually changing the context of what the role is, because we're trying to sell a dream now to somebody. So how do algorithms adapt? How does the technology adapt around these two very different sort of documents, which are so key and critical to the recruitment process?
Well, I think you have to look at what really good recruiters do. So really bad recruiters will take the job spec and then go like checking off the boxes that are written down there. Say, oh, he has he has Python and Hadoop, but he doesn't have interpersonal skills, and he doesn't have Java. So that's probably not a good candidate. What really good recruiters do is they enter into a dialogue and try to really understand what the job is about. What is the performance in the job? What is the day-to-day? What kind of motivation does the candidate need to actually want to do that job? And this is what good recruiters do. And I think that's kind of the challenge, not for algorithms, because once we have that data, we can plug them into our algorithms just fine. But to get really easy to use information elicitation methods for this type of information, and I think a lot of that can actually be worked on using fairly simple dialogue system, right? Some people might be familiar who have some experience with AI with the ELIZA system, which is a simulated psychotherapist. So ELIZA just asks people very simple questions and gets them to talk about stuff that's troubling them. There's very simple AI behind it, just a kind of simple dialogue manager. And I think if you would get this kind of dialogue technology between the hiring manager and the way the semantic search or match queries are formulated, I think you could get very, very far in getting really to the core of what makes performance in the job tick.
Well, Gorkan, you're using, and thank you, Jakub, that's a great explanation, and we're not saying to people it's like the 8-ball where you say, you know, oh, am I going to be good tonight, and throw the 8-ball around. It's a bit more sophisticated than that. But Gorkan, when you're looking for entrepreneurial, you know, you're using your tools and your skills to identify entrepreneurial people. Have you got a baseline of what does that mean beforehand? How are you actually figuring out what you're searching for?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. I think it kind of relates back to the previous discussion. I mean, the way we approached it from the start was basically majority consensus. When you ask people what is entrepreneurial, so you could talk to organizations and they will say, you know, we need more entrepreneurial people today, especially today with all the technology. We need to be more innovative, and this is major corporations. But then the question is, what is entrepreneurial? Any recruiter can have a very different view about what they're looking for. So what we did basically was a scan of the entire literature on of what entrepreneurial means, and made a content analysis, if you like, and condensed that into a few themes. So it's not really our own opinion, but it's the majority opinion. And once that is established, what you are doing is basically saying, well, how do we actually assess that particular thing? So even if you have a concept of what entrepreneurial means, in our case, it's, you know, someone who is opportunistic, someone who is creative, visionary, and proactive. But how do you actually assess whether someone is like that? You could talk to them in an interview. Quite difficult to know how creative they are if you're just looking at it like that. So this is where we are trying to use algorithms, and that's by, for instance, using self-report questionnaires about how people act in day-to-day sort of situations, whether they spot different opportunities, etc. But actually, it's not that much about whether the questions actually measure those things. I mean, we couldn't possibly know whether a self-report measure is accurate in measuring someone's entrepreneurial talent, let's say. So what we do is take that information that we get from the self-report, and it's also other types of measures, like people play different situations, or you give them different situations and they have to respond in certain ways, and gamification, etc. But I think the crucial thing is to look at that information that you have gotten from a particular test. How does that actually relate to actual behaviors at work? And I'm not just talking, you know, does it match a particular criteria that someone has written on paper, but I'm talking about actual behavior at work. So does a particular score predict, say, a high score on entrepreneurial potential? Does it predict whether someone will actually come up with new ideas at work, whether they will generate new business, whether they will come up with new designs, change certain methods of production? These are very objective criteria that we are basing our algorithms on. So particular scores on a test and particular behaviors at work that can be quantified and measured. I think that's the basic approach that this technology, or what we're talking about today, is anyway. You should have whatever it is. It's self-report in our case, but it can be Facebook profile, LinkedIn profile in other cases. But essentially, that information needs to be linked to actual behaviors at work for it for us to know whether that information is useful or how useful it is. So it is that algorithm. Essentially, an algorithm needs to predict something. You can't produce algorithms without a purpose. So the purpose of the algorithm should always be to predict particular behaviors at work, and that's what we're trying to do with the assessments.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here for a bit. I can't.
This has to sit in your sweet spot now, Darshana.
I know. I can't resist. I think your way of thinking, Gorkan, like really lines up with what we are building and have built so far, and also trying to perfect and build. In that we use games that have been heavily based on scientific studies. We've turned these studies into easy-to-play games. We extract traits. The candidate plays the games, top performers in companies play games, and then we use the algorithms to match, based on these traits that we extract, a candidate to a top performer's behavior. Of course, there are many more to sort of make sure that this works. We have to then track this individual and see whether they themselves then go on to become top performers, right? Which then means we have to quantify what top performance means in the ways that you talked about and things like that. So there's a lot of validation that's required, right? But the logic, definitely, I'm definitely with you on this.
Yeah, I think it's where we are really lacking in terms of progress is the validation part.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And that's not. I mean, I think there's a very practical reason for that. Is that simply people don't want to give away the data. The data is all over the place. We don't have, very few organizations have all the data in one place for someone to take and analyze. There are data privacy issues, of course, but there is also another aspect, which is the quantification of behavior at work. I think we are really lacking there. I think we have quite good measures of, or we can get quite a good indication of how we can measure a person's online profile or test scores. We can get all of that, but where we are really lacking is quantifying behavior at work and basically performance. I mean, we have performance appraisals or sales or things like that, but I think the whole performance measurement aspect in organizations is still a long way behind kind of measuring people or psychological assessment. And before we establish a very firm way of measuring performance, and there is new technology that is helping with that actually, like apps to kind of get quick feedback on how someone has done in a particular project, or informal kind of relationships, again through apps that one can do. A lot of organizations are doing, well, not a lot, a few organizations are doing that now. But until we establish sort of the measurement of performance at work, we will never be able to be sure how valuable the information is we get from other assessments.
Yeah, and human beings as well, right? We're rich, we're leaky, our behaviors are, layered, complex. It's sort of hard to figure out ways to quantify or grasp these things. I say this as someone who spent many years studying monkeys, and boy, are they much easier to decode in some ways. You sit with them for hours, you watch them. There's a little bit more of a grasp, although different species, and so you can't tell what they're thinking. But yeah.
I think if you want to have the blueprint, if you want a blueprint for how that kind of quantification can take place, you should really read Dave Egger's book, The Circle.
Okay.
I think it might lessen our appetite for that type of quantification.
Absolutely. Herbert Simon, this is another person who lately I've been reading a lot of, and incredibly rich work.
What I find fascinating lately is, even though we're lacking this type of quantification of success at work, how can you tie back these things to coming back to the very simple documents that we have early on in the recruitment process? Because maybe we'll have to restrict our scope to kind of selecting the people that the hiring manager wants to talk to, right? I mean, that's already pretty ambitious goal, and it's what most recruiters do. But how can you tie these kind of behaviors or activities that are related to success in the workplace to actual textual cues, to phrases that people use in their CVs, right? I think it's not about job titles and skill names and technologies. It's really, if you as a recruiter, if you read a CV, you are scanning for things like, I achieved this, and the result of this was this outcome. I changed the way my department worked. I introduced a new technique. And these are actual textual patterns that algorithms can find very easily.
Yeah. Also, I have a question for you in that, from my experience, it has been that resumes are particularly difficult to parse, just given how completely unstructured. There is no standard way that it is structured, right? People design their resumes in all of these different ways and to extract information from it to me is like one of the trickiest documents to extract information or to automatize this extraction from. And would you agree with this?
No, it's I mean, from a computer point of view, it's a fairly structured document. It contains a lot of variability in language, but actually, look at what state-of-the-art parsers like our own and many others do. Is actually it's quite parsable. But I think the level of depth of analysis that you see now is kind of restricted to job titles, companies, dates, locations, names of techniques and skills. And I think for the next generation of semantic matching technologies, we need to go one level deeper, really understanding what you did in your job at that particular company.
That's great.
Sorry.
I was just going to do a quick reset again. Sorry, Darshana. Just about 15-20 minutes to go of Rec Hangout. We're discussing machine learning, artificial intelligence, psychology, neuroscience, and a range of different topics that all look about how we can actually assess people's skills and abilities and traits more effectively for doing the work that they might be wanting to do. We've touched on how maybe some of the documents that we have to work from are not necessarily suited to that, whether it's a CV or a resume or a job spec. But I think we've all agreed that the machine could do it now and we can all go home, except that, as Jakub pointed out, the recruiter still has an awful lot to do in that process. Look, as an example, 15 years ago at Resumex, I tested a recruiter versus our technology, and we did it in 3 minutes, she did it in 25 minutes, we all came up with the same 3. So the machine could do it, and I always said she was a great recruiter because she was able to do what we could do. So yes, the parsing could be there, tech is working, but it's how people implement technology, I think, that's a challenge. So one question I would ask Darshana, you mentioned earlier about we can really get and perhaps address a lot of the bias issues that might come out in the recruiting process by doing what you do, combining what Jakub does. But if we look at, say, the Pymetrics approach, or look at the sort of approach that Gorkan is taking, what if the person we're assessing within the business, the current employee, has already got bias, is a biased individual per se, and we're mapping what good looks like? Does that include their biases?
Yeah, to some extent. So it's a combination, right, of things that can be used to unbias. One is blinding information. So you say, hey, you know, these are the kinds of biases that exist. These are the issues people tend to have. You should be aware of this, and you should, you know, blind yourself to it. This was done in orchestra auditions in the United States, for instance. They found that they were hiring no women, and when they put the people behind the screen, they were suddenly hiring more women. So this is like, some part of it is just bringing it to people's attention, and just having that in mind helps alleviate some of it. And the other part is actually using statistical modeling to detect some of those biases more efficiently, and then sort of correct for it. And so the combination of the two things can be really helpful to alleviate these biases.
So I'd like to ask the three of you then, because one of the big movements here in the UK, particularly in public sector, is to name blind. So removing all of that sort of personally identifiable information away from a candidate's application, CV, or application form, and so we can assess them up until that point of getting ready to have an interview, and they're all, in theory, completely anonymized. Does the sort of technology and the approach that you and Gorkan in particular are taking take that into account? How do you see name blind as being a more unbiased way of recruiting, or do you? I'll start with you, Darshana, then Gorkan, and then over to Jakub.
I think name blinding helps to some extent, to a fairly large extent, although I think more, there should be more information that's sort of blanked out, where you have either measures of traits that are extracted from games the way we do, or just self-reports without, you know, name, ethnicity, where you went to school, where you grew up, that sort of information removed. And I think this can be, at least for the first couple of steps, can be really helpful, because sometimes a candidate has no fighting chance at all because they don't even show up in the initial lists that people do. I think the resumes process is still really useful, and it definitely hinges on how good the recruiter is, and so companies should pay attention to the logics that people are following. These algorithms, the the steps that the humans follow in selecting people. And I think that is necessary too. But to have the information blind does go a great deal of a distance. Also, like other things, in that if you're evaluating people side by side, then you have sort of a reference basis. If you don't have a panel where everyone's opinion collapses into one, whereas you're doing it one by one, and now you have all of these opinions independently contending against each other, there are all of these hacks, so to speak, that can help us ameliorate some of the issues with bias in particular.
Okay, so I think, yeah, like Darshana said, I think name blinding is only one of the things that we should do, but I think absolutely we should do. And I mean, I think there will be much more that we need to do. I think first of all, with things like resumes and CVs, I mean, it's quite easy to just compare, and there's quite a lot of evidence on this and quite a lot of research already that shows that when you take CVs, for instance, and see how well they later predict how good a candidate will be, they're not very good at predicting it. So we already have that evidence that CVs actually aren't that good. And it's quite easy to see why. I mean, it's not just seeing a name or seeing the education or the school someone went to, the kind of grade they got, which in itself is not very predictive of actual performance, but also things like fatigue. In reading 200 CVs, humans will have to take shortcuts, which machines don't have to do. So when we look at things like an IQ test, for instance, it's much more predictive of later performance than something like a CV or even an interview, because in an interview, again, you will have the same biases. What sort of person was just before that time? Or what does the person look like? What does their body language look like? Which in themselves don't predict how a person will perform that well. So I think the more we actually automate and the more we try to reduce these biases, the better off we will be. So blinding in many ways, I think, is just beneficial for the process. We already have evidence for that, I think. So that's, I don't think it's a major sort of contradiction there.
Jakub?
Yeah, so I'm not per se a big fan of trying to eliminate bias from recruiting altogether, because I think recruitment is all about bias, right? It's about selecting somebody who from your personal point of view, you think will maximize the chances of doing well. So I think we all have a kind of right to have some sort of bias, but we're trying to eliminate the wrong types of bias, right? That are hurting our performance as companies, as and at a larger level as society as a whole. So there's an interesting study that a guy, PhD student here in Netherlands, a guy called Colin Lee, he actually looked at ATS data from a whole number of companies, and the #1 predictor whether somebody would be invited for an interview was actually age, right? So that's clearly the wrong bias, and this is what recruiters do today. So should we, anonymize age like people do in the US? Should we anonymize names, pictures, maybe even the schools that somebody went to? I think this would go in the wrong directions. I think by providing the technology and actually having the decisions that people make more traceable than with the stack of papers that they have on their desk, you're already creating let's say the right incentive to maybe question the decision later. So these 10 guys came up in your search, and this is the search you did. Why did you not look at the top 3 guys at all? So I think this kind of accountability in terms of logging and tracing is much more powerful in the long run than putting some sort of superficial force measures in place, like starring out the name, which will have an impact, obviously, but it will also make people annoyed and trying to seek shortcuts to find out the nationality or the age in another way.
So if we look at that, and I think, so we've got the technology that, say, Pymetrics with your gaming approach, and Gorkan's talked about a similar approach. There's the old school psychometrics from the SHL and other providers like that. If we want, and sorry, I go around in circles on this because I have a client who is saying we have to anonymize a bunch of data now. I'm saying, but if we were using these other tools earlier in the process, we wouldn't have to worry about anonymizing name, location, and all that stuff because we'd be sifting down to relevant candidates based on their traits, their qualities, their abilities, before we get to that point where the perhaps biased recruiter is taking out people because their name is Darshana or Gorkan or Jakub or Alan. So how do we actually get these technologies then to be more cost effective for companies to use them earlier in the process?
Well, they are more cost effective already, aren't they? I mean, surely like getting recruiters to look through hundreds of CVs is much more expensive than getting some algorithms to do it in a few seconds. So I think it's more of a, you know, business-related strategic decisions that you know, we need to convince organizations to do. And you know, when I have conversations with our clients, I think that happens. But on a broader scale, I think it's lack of awareness often that of all of this that we've been talking about today that is inhibiting it rather than actual cost.
Yeah, also like you mentioned earlier, the numbers that these algorithms can go through, right? They don't fatigue. You can have like really high throughput, cost-effective outcomes. And I think as this catches on, companies, especially the larger ones, will realize more and more that it's definitely worth the time. I'm going to jump back for a second to something that was said earlier about biases. I definitely do agree in the fact that these kinds of things allow us to figure out what kinds of, I wouldn't call it biases, but maybe opinions are useful, what are not, where that takes us, what exists. We already know some exist. There is like some amount of gender bias. And so in those cases, name blinding has already been shown to help. You know, banks are hiring more women when they use this kind of technology, which traditionally is a very male-heavy profession, and so it has been useful in some ways. But yes, it forces us to make sort of our logic explicit, and I think this itself helps a lot, and so we can trace it back better and sort of figure out what helps where. Sorry to backtrack.
So let me get a final theme, I think, for us, as we've got about 5 minutes or so to go. I've loved this conversation. I think it's been one of the most stimulating shows we've ever had. I think probably we could carry on for hours yet talking about this, and I'm sure that the three of you will talk with each other for hours again. But I'm going to play the dumb card here for the moment. What the heck does neuroscience, algorithms, gamification, I'm just a poor slob of a recruiter. I don't know what this stuff means. It all sounds out here somewhere. So how do we as an industry create a language that enables us, and Jakub, we've talked about it in CV extraction and parsing for years, people haven't understood what we mean. How do we bring those technology themes and terms that we have down to something that the recruiter can understand, so when we go through that educational process that we need to do to get them to use our stuff more effectively? Any ideas on that? Jakub, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, so this is a topic I'm really passionate about. It took me about 5 to 10 years away from my PhD research to realize this. Nobody cares about technology. So it's really about how you package it, how you productize it, how usable it is. So I think the main task that we have as vendors or as producers of this type of technology is to really hide all the complexity, all the algorithms. You know, there's machine learning inside, there's semantic technologies inside. Nobody cares. It's all about getting the right person in your shortlist and making that really actionable. And that's convincing, right? And I think that's what we need to do. And I think the talk about technology is really kind of for the inner circle, and it's all about quality of the results.
Good. Thank you, Jakub. But we love to talk about our cool stuff, don't we?
Yeah, with a beer.
Gorkan?
Yeah, I agree with Jakub completely, to be honest. You know, I generally just say, or the way I think we should just sort of communicate it is to say, look, these technologies allow you to measure the competencies that you need for someone that you're recruiting in a much faster and cost-effective way, and equally as accurate as you would do as a recruiter yourself. So it's focusing on competencies, which is the language of usually of HR and recruiters, that we can measure through technology. That's how I usually put it.
Okay, Darshana?
Yeah, I completely agree with this as well. Also centering it on the human, right? Which is that we know these things about human behaviors. This is things that people have intuitive knowledge about, you know, from their own behaviors, but looking around at that, we're not terribly consistent. You know, what if it was super you in some ways? You have help in doing all of these things that you would like to enact, and so that would make things more cost effective. You could be more consistent. You could remove these biases that you may not be aware of but don't quite want to have. You could, if it's centered around the human, I think people are willing to engage in that conversation a lot, because this is a tool that helps us just sort of be better at things that we would like to be better at.
Yeah, and maybe as a last comment on that, so the provocative statement that started this conversation is, can algorithms do it better than recruiters? I think it's also kind of, it's provocative, but it's also setting the wrong context in terms of this usability and the quality of the results and convincing people to adopt. Because I think it's really not a replacement question. It's really, what kind of tools do companies, do hiring managers, and the recruiters need to make their work better, to stop being the travel agents who type magic commands into their Sabre travel reservation system, and start really talking to people about work and who's the right person.
So we should call it, how can algorithms be used to improve of you selecting a right candidate?
Yeah, we are talking Textkernel, we're talking all the time about the recruiter experience and the candidate experience. Those are the two things that matter.
Yeah.
Yep, that's great, guys, and I think you've just given Louise the theme for her post-show blog, because I think she was probably sitting there going, man, how am I going to write about all this technology now in ways that my readers will understand it? So thank you, guys. This has been absolutely brilliant. I think you've just wrapped it up and brought it back into what we need to do for our day job as recruiters. How can we be better? How can we identify better candidates? How can companies have better performance because of using these tools? And whatever we call them, they sit behind the wall of what the tool set is that we're actually using. It's been a great show. I really want to thank, Darshana, Gorkan, and Jakub for investing your time with us today and sharing your knowledge and your brilliance. Mark, for your questions and keeping track of things, and Louise for holding us back there in the Twitter stream and keeping that going. And Louise's blog will be out after the show. Louis, I'm going to kick it back over to you as it's 2 o'clock now, and you'll explain how people can get a copy of this show, because I know you all want to be able to share this with all of your friends and family after today.
Yes,
Louis?
indeed. Thank you, Alan. Great show, everybody. Thanks so much. So this will be on YouTube. Anyone who's signed up to watch this will get a link after the show with the recording, which you can share, as Alan said, with your friends and family, of course. And also, we will be sending out a mail shot to everyone who signed up, of course, with Louise's Notes on the Rec Hangout blog, with links to all the resources and ideas she can gather, and also perhaps those Amazon books that were meant, or those books which I hope are on Amazon or any other provider, we can put in there as well, that you guys mentioned. And we'll keep you informed about the next episode, hopefully in August. So keep a lookout for that email. But in the meantime, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for watching. Take care.